just real quick, I want to just explain one thing to our audience, which is you may be wondering how you get on our show. And the answer is not that you're friends with us. The answer is that you put out stuff that is really worthwhile and important to amplify. And Lewis, frankly, has been killing it over on VentureBeat, pertaining mostly to enterprise security related topics, though Lewis, as we've alluded to, has very deep background in things like manufacturing ERP. And it's the connections between the two that really interest me the most. So, Lewis, before this event, you said to me that ERP customers just aren't ready for the security challenges that AI poses. We're going to get into some of your articles a little bit, but can you just sort of say what prompted you to sort of toss that out to me?
Yeah, because I work with a lot of single instance ERP companies. I'm currently, in addition to writing for VentureBeat, I work with Dassault, and my job is to work with mid-tier manufacturers who've got IQMS system, now Delmia works, and I go visit them, and it tears your heart out to walk into a single instance ERP company. It's a mom and pop shop, and they've just been hit with ransomware, and to see the place come to a halt, and to meet these folks head on and see what they're going through. And it's no knock on them. It's just that when you get really into the depths of how to make an ERP system run, for example, plastics manufacturing, I spent a lot of time with injection molders. Uh, I must visit with 4 or 5 a month. And I love that part of my job to get on the shop floor. And I write about that a lot. I What bothers me about security is sometimes it's an afterthought and it doesn't become a priority until they've been burned. And the building blocks for a manufacturer to get started with this is to realize that the old perimeter securities like interdomain trust relationships on Windows Server. I mean, you walk in and people are actually running interdomain trust relationships, and this is like 2-decade old technology, and that the perimeter is dead. So the perimeter is no longer a player. You've got to think about individualized protecting the identities of every person and protecting Active Directory because that's what attackers want. And one story that really typifies this is a single instance manufacturer outside of Chicago. Won't disclose their name, but they got hit by an ransomware attack. And the attackers said, we want 2 million in ransom in Bitcoin. And the family responded back and said, we're not going to pay it. And we don't have that kind of money. And then they sent them their cyber insurance statement that they had actually been able to get off the main server by just being able to hack into their server, and said, by the way, you're covered up to 2 million, by the way. So, so this is the level of, yeah, that's true. That's from before clouds. Now, one thing you have to realize about manufacturers too is manufacturers stay on premise. The manufacturers are staying on premises, specifically in plastics and regulated industries, because by regulation, they need to be able to control every instance and every rollout of every version. So for compliance purposes, pharmaceutical manufacturers have to be on premise in a single instance, or even in a multi-instance or a two-tier ERP configuration. But they do this for compliance because it's a lot easier than going to the cloud, because you have to control every iteration of the software that comes out. So, when you go to these, small manufacturing companies, they have one centralized ERP system, and they're trying to protect it through perimeter security and not zero trust, and not being able to lock down every identity and every endpoint. And endpoints are critical, because there was another manufacturer that I know of that their supplier was hacked, and that supplier had a link into the centralized processing system or centralized system. It's a procurement system into the main manufacturer. That small supplier got hacked, and then from that, the hacker was able to get into the main system. Now, that also played out with Maersk shipping, and you may not recall that, but a small supplier in Ukraine was hacked by a Russian activists. I think it was, people debated whether it was nation state or not, but they hacked a small supplier in Ukraine, and they took over the entire Maersk shipping framework or network just from that small supplier. And that emanates from not having strong endpoint security. And so I see
Lewis, you froze up. He was in the middle of a really good point too.
attackers want to control Active Directory, and 9 times out of 10, that's where they're going.
Right.
And Brian's earlier point about Gmail and security, business email compromise is by far the quickest way in. Phishing attacks and with AI, phishing has become so ubiquitous, but also so tailored and multilingual. Um, in the intersection of what I write about and what I see with manufacturing and the need for customers to move to the cloud. I mean, it's actually more secure to run in a hosted instance, run hosted managed services, or of security in there. Look at identity as the perimeter. Identities are the new perimeter,
Yep.
not the server. And I mean, if you know a manufacturer, you know a business that doesn't have endpoint security in place, or a firewall is not enough, because there are techniques now where multi-factor authentication can be overcome. Uh, and you really need to think about zero trust and endpoint security, especially through your supplier network. Yeah, I was going to say the other aspect of this is why zero trust is important. Is once an attacker gets in, the level of sophistication of attacks is off the charts. There's something called a living off the land attack, and that's where prompt injections come in and synthetic identities, and they're the hardest things to stop. And a living off the land attack is where an attacker will use common uh, items and common tools and common code bases to be able to attack at a company as well. And that's really hard to find out about until it's too late.
Right. And what you laid out, I think, makes a lot of sense. And your zero trust principles, you've really detailed very well in your blog. And obviously, humans still create a lot of vulnerabilities. I almost blew a gasket on a show earlier today because there was a little too much hyping up of MCP for my taste, and it was referred to as a secure uh, architecture. And I said, hang on a sec, like that's actually a pretty insecure agentic architecture unless you know what you're doing, which is the case, right, for a lot of these tools. And someone said to me, like, well, humans make mistakes too. And I said, well, it's not an either or. Humans make mistakes that expose your company, but you can exponentialize that with the improper use of these tools, because think about MCP servers having access to a wide range of functions within your enterprise. And Lewis, you add to that in a blog post right around the holidays that I think really crystallizes it when you wrote, OpenAI admits prompt injection is here to stay as enterprise lag on defenses. The point being that a very small percentage of companies have acted on these kinds of issues, and it's not going away. Right? There's not a simple technical fix to these problems, and so that's a lot for manufacturers to absorb right now. But that's what you're writing about.
Right. And, I do spend a lot of time with manufacturing CEOs and owners. Uh, and I travel around quite a bit. And uh, they're not ready to take on that challenge yet. The vast majority want AI within the four walls of their business. They don't want anybody on ChatGPT. I've written a lot about making sure people don't get in uh, to make sure people don't get into ChatGPT and provide their data. The point is that uh, being able to deliver AI within the four walls of an enterprise and be able to keep that data secure, and even to air gap it. And to the comment, yeah, nothing is 100% secure, but a perimeterless business, a business that relies on perimeter, is a sitting duck. Now, IBM surveys have shown that manufacturing is the single most attacked industry. And for good, and there's a lot of reasons for that. It's because security is an afterthought in manufacturing and an ERP system. I write a weekly newsletter internally on security and what's going on the latest in ERP. And I even have my own hype index I publish in my own newsletter around the SO. And, SAP is really taking it on the chin right now with the outstanding CVEs they have. And that's because NetWeaver. That's because the North Koreans realized that they could break NetWeaver, and by breaking NetWeaver, they could get into some of the largest manufacturing companies and extract data, shut it down, practice geopolitical, provocative strategies and things like that. But it's a very, very aggressive space with adversarial AI right now. It's moving very fast. And so for manufacturers, I mean, the building blocks of zero trust are treat identity as a new perimeter, simple things like if you have logins that you gave to contractors, you wouldn't believe how many companies have logins that are still on Dropbox, Salesforce, Okta, you name it, SAP logins that are, a decade old and they're still active for anybody to get on there. So that's another on-ramp that you see with a lot of manufacturers getting hit with attacks as well.
Brian.
So I think what's really interesting to me is the stakes have changed for companies as well as the technology that's hitting them. And I think it's the rationale of what these bad players out there in the market, what do they want? And in some cases, they don't want to hold you up for ransom. That's not their end state. That's not what they're looking for. They're looking to rape and pillage, a company's internal servers for all kinds of intellectual property, things they can sell on the black market, whatever, to other parties. You've got nation states who want to they want the IP, but they need hard currency. So they're looking for ways to get funds transferred out. They don't want to they want to be a parasite, but they don't want to kill the host. They want to siphon this stuff. Now you got the more amateurs groups, the smaller scale ones. They want to do like a CEO impersonation or whatever and get like some kind of one-shot wire transfer coming out of it. And I share your angst when you go around and visit some of these smaller manufacturers because the level of sophistication just isn't really there. When you think about, I like to use for illustrative purposes, I show a pie kind of chart that shows all the different things a role is responsible for, whether it's IT or HR or whatever. And what you realize is, okay, like in HR, they may have 16 things HR is responsible for. It doesn't matter the size of the company. They all got to do recruiting, payroll, benefits, et cetera, et cetera. And then you ask, how many HR people do you have at this like small manufacturer? You find out it's like 2.
Right.
And they go, there's no way they're doing all 16 of those things. Same problem happens in IT. The IT person at a small manufacturer, they're doing physical site security, like the alarm system for the building. They've got cell phones they have to manage. They do all the onboarding and offboarding and PCs and loading up the software. Their plate is beyond full. It's overloaded. And I think this personnel and time budgeting kind of constraint is part of the problem that they're not getting help with. And anything else gets added to their plate is something's going to fall off the table and not get addressed, which is what creates environment that these bad actors are going to exploit.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the CIO role, analogous to what you just said about the CHRO role and human resources. CIOs are like time splitting their time trying to do that. But you know what? One good thing that's happened with this en masse move to the cloud is that security is now being baked in there a lot more, and it's a lot easier to be able to enforce multi-factor authentication, even biometric authentication in the case of highly regulated industries that go to the cloud, and be able to bring a greater level of overall security, even in a hosted managed service environment, which is more of a hybrid type of environment, where you're still on a server, but it's a different model compared to cloud. But you're absolutely right, and it's interesting to see how this is progressing and how critical it is to get beyond thinking that it's only going to be that little wire coming in to your company. If you're a small small manufacturers It's only you think it's going to be that T1 line coming in or something like that, but I mean, under constant attack of different business email compromise, and once an attacker decides that they've picked out a target, they could scan ports. I mean, very sophisticated
Oh, yeah.
technology right now. Um, and
And
it,
what a lot of them are buying their IT hardware at Micro Center and Best Buy, whatever. They're not buying commercial stuff. They're buying home electronics materials, and they're
yeah,
putting them in their small businesses, and they don't necessarily stand up the, if you will, the best kind of security that they ought to. And
true, true. I think starting with identity, get away from perimeter-based security and get into endpoint security and get that locked down. And my goodness, lock down Active Directory, because everybody wants Active Directory, because once you lock down Active Directory, you lock down a company. You lock down the identities, you pretty much own the company at that point. Um, and then the other aspect of this is is of course education, but it's being able to understand who someone says they really are. And this gets into synthetic IDs, and I've written about this, about 11 attack vectors that bypass traditional security control. And synthetic identities are more and more happening across supply chains. Uh, and
Mhm.
attackers know that, you disrupt a supply chain, it's like a ransomware multiplier. Especially, it's no accident that food and medical supply chains get hit the hardest because of the time urgency in manufacturing and the time value of what's going on in food as well as in medical and manufacturing supply chains. If an attacker knows they can do that, they can get like a 4.35 multiple on a ransomware uh, type of a uh, overall overall way that they look at that in terms of a payout. But it's interesting. I mean, at VentureBeat, we've interviewed some hackers that we promise not to dox them, but uh, that it's more along the lines of like these people are like red teamers that have joined the dark side, and they started out doing it out of curiosity, but curiously not, money is not that big of an issue. It's this prowess of being able to break a system, and manufacturing systems are easy to break, and so that's why I think what's going on with SAP is going through its own epiphany right now about that in a big way on NetWeaver with all of its CVEs as well. They've got some serious work to do on security with their legacy because it wasn't baked in. It was almost like it was like their MCP of a decade ago or a generation ago.
Right.
Um,
Hey,
but
Lewis, can I ask you something? Because I think this is important to your overall approach when you talk about the zero trust concepts. Isn't one of the precepts of modern security to assume that you are going to get breached, and obviously you want to stop that if you can, but assume that you will, but you want to sort of have containment of that and limited damage through that breach, right? So isn't that a key component of the whole thing, is to make it so that even if you get inside, you can't essentially demolish everything you want and take everything you want?
yeah, anybody interested in that, then this standard calls that out. And the NIST standard, I think it's 812, which is the zero trust NIST standard, says assume you've already been breached. And that brings in segmentation and microsegmentation. And that's where you segment out your network, and and you have segmentation in place. And when CISOs roll out zero trust, they usually start with MFA and identity-based security.
Lewis, I think we lost your last sentence there about the micro. Then they
Oh,
repeat that.
to assume that you've already been breached and someone's already in your network.
Right. Doxing is that another tool from the AI trolls.
No, doxing is actually revealing the identity of a hacker to the public, or revealing the identity of someone who's doing hacking and making their name public. That's doxing. Yeah.
So Lewis, you referenced the article on 11 runtime attacks that CISOs need to be aware of. I thought one of your key points there was why traditional security is failing at runtime. And then you wrote another really cool, relevant post to this discussion, which is 7 steps to AI supply chain visibility before a breach forces the issue. And you had some eye-opening stats. You talked about how 4 in 10 enterprise applications will feature task-specific AI agents this year, Yet research from Stanford indicates that a mere 6% of organizations have 6% have an advanced AI security strategy in place. And then you went on to say that Palo Alto Networks predicts 2026 will bring the first major lawsuits holding executives personally liable. I said personally liable for rogue AI actions. Many
Yep.
organizations are grappling with how to contain the accelerating nature of these threats, and governance doesn't respond to quick fixes in this regard. But then you went on, and I think that was a really great wake up call, right? Because who wants to get personally held responsible for rogue AI activity? I
Sure.
can't think of a single CEO I've talked to in the last year who's had that on their wish list. But then you go on in the post and you talk about some of the visibility steps. So you've talked some about the solutions and how customers can respond, but what are some of the most valuable things that supply chain and manufacturing customers can do to start getting on top of this?
First of all, you're not going to stop uh, AI from being used. You're not going to stop ChatGPT and all of its flavors, Anthropic, uh, any of these. And I think you have to look at it from the perspective of how do you contain this threat, either at the browser level, uh, or do you contain it with a tool like I've written a lot about SentinelOne's acquisition of uh, of their latest acquisition of a company that will stop this type of there's Nightfall Security, uh, and there's a variety of other companies that do this. A lot of people are going to and then CrowdStrike just this week bought a company that will actually do this in an existing browser. So the CISOs I talk to, and there's one from Clearwater Analytics, which is like a $6 billion financial services firm. Um, and this is really an interesting story. And this guy, new to the job, ChatGPT just came out. He had to go in front of the board, and the board goes, "So how are we going to get in front of this? And don't tell us we're going to ban it because we know shadow AI will just go through like a meteoric rise." And so he chose a enterprise browser that can actually sense this stuff and shut it down. That's one aspect. And then the other aspect is prompt security does that as well. But you cannot legislate against this. I've written a lot about shadow AI, and we've done our own market roll-ups on market size of how pervasive shadow AI is. I've talked to partners at consulting firms that have built apps that have API calls in them and their shadow AI apps to get more work done because they're concerned about layoffs. Junior people that are about to become analysts or about to become partners, the fear is real in consulting about being replaced by AI. And I mean, we ran the numbers and we verified them corroborated them, but it's like an epidemic right now about people building AI apps, pirated AI or shadow AI apps complete with APIs. So that's one aspect of that. So what you tell a manufacturer is think about those elements. But then the other aspect of this is who really needs to get to AI? Who really needs to get on the internet anyway? And does it have to be that egalitarian? Know, and the CEOs that I talk to, again, I'm talking to, companies in the up to 500 million, maybe a couple at a billion level. But they want it all in the four walls, and they are calling for LLMs that are completely contained, their data being sovereign. It gets down to this very, very basic view of data being sovereign and not shared outside their four walls.
But Lewis,
So
I can't check my Reddit threads then.
I know, I know.
That's
So
that's rough,
they're,
man.
a lot of them are going through this, but the financial services firms, so they realize you've got to have internet access. They're jumping on internet enterprise browsers, and I'm going to be writing a feature about that next week about enterprise browsers and what's going on there, because there's just so much activity with the CISOs and security people that I talk to, and there's just so much vendor activity on it as well.
All right,
So,
Brian, hold your thought real quick. For the chat, if you have a last question on security and ERP and supply chain for Lewis, please pop it in now because we're about to wrap this segment. And Brian, take us home.
well, this is a pretty wild thought. So I walked into one of these manufacturers, like Lewis has been describing, and things were kind of a little hinky with the way, some of the people behaved and the way the systems work. And eventually I traced the problem down to a department manager's PC who had unquestionably the most wired into pornography websites I've ever seen in my lifetime. And of course, with those came all kinds of other pieces of malware and spyware and everything else on there. To my astonishment, this guy tried to explain why that shouldn't be a problem and why did I remove it from his machines. And I'm like, you're talking about a gateway into things. And I guess where I'm going with this, Lewis, is
Yeah, where are you
so,
going with this? I'm
is,
wondering.
is that you could put in technical traps to stop this stuff. You can have gates at the front to stop it. You can tell people they can't get on, certain sites or use certain utilities, whatever. And they're human beings. They're going to find ways to work around it, get
Yeah.
around it. They'll even disable the security on their own devices just so they can go do, to John's point, so he can go check his Reddits 6 times a day. So, for all the technology talk, I think we need to remember that a lot of this falls apart because there are human beings on both ends of these situations, and they don't always have the best of intentions or the best business savvy or security savvy to deal with. So the people can be a big piece of the problem. Anyway,
It's
that's all.
always, yeah. I mean, the MGM hack, uh, the attackers knew more. The attackers had a better org chart than the people that worked there. That's
Mm.
how well, and they studied LinkedIn. And I spoke with someone who was involved in the reparation of MGM after that massive attack where they shut down the casino. And he said these attackers had spent about a year studying MGM as a target, knew everything. All they did was call the call center and ask for a reset, and then they were off. Then they were free. The
Wow.
other aspect about the, the gentleman is supposed to be building things rather than staring at that screen. Um, Endpoint security software now is very affordable that will block actual sites. So
Hmm.
there are manufacturers who now use endpoint security systems that are cloud based that you can roll out pretty quickly across your entire domain. So if it's on the endpoint, it's not going anywhere. One manufacturer put it out there, and they saw a sudden spark in everybody running in incognito mode, and people trying to like circumvent the endpoint agent. But this endpoint agent shut down a lot of that. It was gambling at this manufacturer, and so they put an endpoint security filter. And again, this is one of the tenets of zero trust. It treated every identity as a new security perimeter, every laptop, every login. We haven't talked about machine identities, but machine-based attacks are on the upswing, and I write about that a lot. And the
Hmm.
last thing I wrote about was like 82 to 1 machine identities to human identities.
Yeah, Brian, there's no like cure-alls for these things, but like I was just listening to a podcast about Threat Locker, which basically like blocks everything by default, and you couldn't be on those rather adventurous websites because it wouldn't be whitelisted. So there's basically the security officers whitelist a handful of applications and everything else, nothing else loads.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
and you just can't get into apps or websites that are not authorized. And that doesn't solve all your problems, of course, but that it does help. Of course, like Lewis and yourself were describing, you still have to keep your humans engaged as to why you're doing that so they don't get frustrated because it starts to feel a little bit like a white collar prison where the solution can be worse to them anyway
Yeah.
than the result because they don't necessarily say, well, that's gonna bother me that much. I'm inconvenient. So anyway, there's a lot of sophistication to doing it right, but there are new tools and that's encouraging as well.
Yeah.
I do want to correct one thing. I'm on Reddit not 6 times a day, more like 10. So So just
That's
wanted,
that's
yeah.
an important correction to get on the record now.
Yeah.
Now I'm feeling better. I mean, personally,
Uh,
thank you for that. I'm feeling better. Yeah.
so- all right.
All
Any
right.
last thing? Anything else for Lewis, Brian, before we head to our close?
Now, if we're going to stay on time, we're going to have to
Okay.
close her up.